The woman who sent me this story began her email like this. My name is Naomi Parker. I'm 32, I own a bakery in Columbus, and my mother sabotaged my grand opening before the front doors were even unlocked. At 8:14 that morning, Naomi stood behind a glass case lined with peach galettes and cinnamon rolls, while 11 cancellation texts hit her phone hard enough to make it rattle across the counter. Her mother had moved Naomi's sister's baby shower onto the exact same day, then called relatives, neighbors, and 2 paying clients to say the bakery launch had been postponed. You know that sick little silence when nobody says sorry because they all know exactly what they're doing? Naomi was standing in it. Hang on a second before we keep going. Drop your city and local time below, because I need to know who's here for this one tonight. Naomi Parker did not become the kind of woman who opens a bakery because life handed her softness. She became that woman because she learned very early that in her family, usefulness was the closest thing to love. That was the part of her email that stayed with me. She wrote, I don't think my mother ever hated me. I think she just found me convenient. And if you grew up in a house like that, you know exactly how different those two things can feel, and yet how much they can wound in the same place. Naomi was the older daughter, the reliable one, the child who got praised for being so mature. Right around the same age most kids are still forgetting lunchboxes on kitchen counters. Her younger sister, Kelsey, was the emotional center of the house from the beginning. If Kelsey cried, dinner paused. If Naomi had a fever, she was told to lie down quietly and not wake her mother unless it got worse. It was never dramatic enough to call abuse from the outside. That is how families like this survive scrutiny. They run on tone, not bruises. They run on one daughter being treated like weather and the other like climate. Their mother, Denise Parker, had a favorite phrase, don't make this harder than it has to be. Naomi heard it when Kelsey forgot deadlines, when Kelsey quit jobs after 3 weeks, when Kelsey borrowed money she never repaid, when Kelsey flirted with crisis the way other people flirt with strangers at weddings. That sentence did a lot of lifting in that house. It meant give in. It meant absorb this. It meant keep the peace by becoming smaller. And Naomi, because she loved her mother in the hungry, humiliating way neglected daughters often do, got very good at shrinking on command. What made this story hit harder for me was that Naomi was not drifting through life, hoping someone would finally notice her effort. She had built a real skill set, the kind that leaves flour in your hair and numbers in your head at the same time. She worked her way through a 2-year pastry program while holding down early shifts at a hotel kitchen, then moved into production baking for a wholesale cafe account in Columbus. She learned lamination by ruining enough butter blocks to cry in private and try again the next morning. She knew what overproof brioche looked like by touch, not theory. She could cost out a seasonal tart down to the gram, calculate labor drag on custom orders, and tell you exactly how many croissants a convection oven could turn in a morning without compromising the second batch. That competence did not impress Denise nearly as much as it should have. In Naomi's family, practical excellence only mattered when it could be extracted. Naomi designed invitations for Kelsey's engagement party because you're better with layouts. Naomi covered a rent shortfall once, then twice, then enough times that the transfers became their own ugly little rhythm. Naomi reviewed Kelsey's baby registry for duplicate items, built spreadsheets for her mother's household bills when Denise said online banking confused her, and once spent an entire Saturday repairing a dessert table for a church fundraiser after a volunteer canceled. Nobody called her selfish when she was useful. Funny how that works. The bakery itself had lived in Naomi's body before it ever had a lease. She had a running note on her phone for 6 years labeled simply, someday. Inside it were equipment lists, neighborhood rents, rough branding ideas, and little observations collected between exhaustion and hope. Warm brass handles, open shelving, salted maple scones in late October, a peach galette every summer because her late father had loved peaches. You know those private dreams you stop saying out loud because other people handle them too casually? That was the bakery for her, too sacred to expose to careless hands. When she finally found the space, it was narrow, sunlit, and slightly imperfect in a way that only matters if you already love something. The front window had a crack in one lower pane. The prep sink needed replacing. The flooring in the back room sloped just enough to annoy a person carrying sheet pans. Naomi signed anyway. She took extra shifts, refinanced her car emptied savings, and did the glamorous entrepreneurial work nobody makes montages about. Grease traps, vendor terms, permit fees, refrigeration repairs, insurance certificates, point of sale setup, tax ID verification. And standing in a hardware store at 9:40 p.m., debating shelf brackets under fluorescent lights. And still, because some hopes die slowly, she kept trying to bring her family into it. Denise got progress photos. Kelsey got tasting boxes. Naomi invited them to paint one accent wall and pretended not to notice when Kelsey spent more time taking selfies than holding a brush. There was one detail in Naomi's email that almost made me put my phone down for a minute. She wrote that on the night the sign went up, she texted her mother a picture of the gold lettering on the window and waited with that specific, tight feeling in her throat. The one you get when you're old enough to know better, but still young enough to hope this time might be different. Denise replied 3 hours later with, "Very cute. Kelsey's ankles are swelling again." That was the emotional math of the family. Naomi's milestones were decorative. Kelsey's inconveniences were emergencies. The thing is, Naomi kept loving them anyway. That matters. It would be easier, cleaner, almost less painful if she had been detached. But she was not detached. She was careful. She kept setting the table for people who only came hungry. Sunday dinners at Denise's house followed the same little choreography. Kelsey arrived late and was still greeted first. Denise asked Naomi to bring bread, ice, or dessert because you always remember the good stuff. Any news Naomi shared got absorbed with a nod, then gently buried under whatever fresh turbulence Kelsey had generated. You know that silence at a family table when someone has just been dismissed and everybody pretends not to notice because acknowledging it would ruin the casserole? Naomi had lived inside that silence for years. By the time Juniper House Bakery had a launch date, Naomi had built more than a business. She had built proof. She had been to confirmations, pre-orders, branded pastry boxes stacked in the office, a local coffee roaster partnership, and a soft opening guest list that included neighbors, church people, former co-workers, and a couple of small catering leads she hoped to turn into recurring accounts. This was not a hobby with Frosting. It was her livelihood. It was payroll projections and margin targets and break-even anxiety wearing an apron. And maybe that was the real offense, the one nobody in her family would ever say plainly. Naomi had made something solid without asking permission. She had created a room where her work had value that did not depend on Denise's approval or Kelsey's mood. Families built on favoritism can tolerate your pain surprisingly well. What they cannot tolerate is your independence. In her email, Naomi wrote, "I think my opening day made my mother realize I might never need to orbit that house again." Once you read that sentence, you can feel the collision coming. The full story of the sabotage started 3 days before the grand opening, which is exactly when people like Denise tend to get bold. Far enough in that backing out becomes expensive. Close enough that panic does the rest of the work for them. Naomi had gone to her mother's house that Thursday evening with a sample box of mini lemon tarts and espresso brownies, partly to be kind, partly because some part of her still wanted to hear her mother say she was proud. Instead, she walked into a dining room full of pastel ribbons, diaper raffle cards, and a giant hand-lettered sign that read, "Welcome, Baby Carter." For a second, Naomi honestly thought she had mixed up the dates. That was in her email, too. I stood there with the pastry box in my hands like an idiot doing calendar math in my head. You know that feeling when everyone else in a room already knows something you don't, and the only thing keeping it polite is the fact that you haven't caught up yet? It was that. Kelsey was at the table, smiling over a pile of tissue paper and tiny beige onesies. Denise was fluffing a balloon arch with the seriousness of a woman preparing for state diplomacy. Naomi asked very quietly why the baby shower decorations were up already. Denise didn't even look embarrassed. She just said, "We moved it to Saturday afternoon. It made more sense for family." Saturday afternoon. The exact day of Naomi's launch. The launch Denise had been invited to for 6 weeks. The launch day printed on the cream cardstock invitation still sitting under a magnet on Denise's refrigerator. Naomi said she could actually hear the refrigerator humming while nobody else spoke. That detail bothered me because it is always the little sounds you remember when your heart drops, not the dramatic line. The appliance, the fork, the ice settling in a glass. When Naomi reminded her mother that the opening was Saturday, Denise gave her this little patient smile that, frankly, should be classified as a controlled substance. Honey, a bakery opening is business. A baby is family. There it was, the family word, always brought out like holy water whenever they needed Naomi to surrender. Kelsey, for her part, did the thing favored daughters do when they want the benefits of cruelty without the stain of intention. She widened her eyes and said, "Wait, I thought you could just do your bakery thing in the morning." As if a grand opening were a dentist's appointment. As if inventory, foot traffic, pre-orders, vendor introductions, and first-day catering pickups all happened by magic and good lighting. As if Naomi hadn't spent months explaining exactly how important that day was. Naomi asked why no one had called her before changing the date. Denise actually sighed. "Because I knew you'd make this difficult." That line matters. It always does. In families like this, the person being blindsided becomes the problem the second they react to being blindsided, and then the uglier details started arriving one by one. An aunt texted Naomi later that night, saying, "Your mother told us you decided to keep the bakery thing small, and family should really be there for Kelsey." One of Naomi's old church neighbors messaged that Denise had called personally to explain there was schedule conflict, and asked if they could stop by the shower instead. By Friday morning, 2 paying clients who had agreed to swing by the opening and discuss dessert tables for future events had canceled politely, both under the impression Naomi had moved or scaled back the event. That is the part that pushes this past rude and into sabotage. Denise was not choosing one daughter over the other in private. She was actively redirecting people, rewriting the story, managing the optics so Naomi looked flexible and Kelsey looked cherished. Naomi called her mother once more that Friday afternoon. Her throat was tight, her hands cold enough that she kept switching the phone from one palm to the other, but she still didn't raise her voice. She asked a simple question. "Did you tell people my opening was postponed?" Denise answered. "I told people what they needed to hear so this family wouldn't be torn in half over pastries. Over pastries. Not over Naomi's lease. Not over her payroll. Not over the loans, the vendor deposits, the launch inventory sitting in labeled bins in a commercial fridge. Just pastries." Kelsey got on speaker at one point and said, "I'm pregnant, Naomi. I can't deal with stress like this," which is one of those lines that sounds harmless until you notice how efficiently it erases the other person's humanity. Naomi's stress did not count. Naomi's work did not count. Naomi was expected to absorb the hit, smile for pictures later, and maybe bring a fruit tart because she was so talented. By that night, Naomi stopped arguing. She stood alone in Juniper House Bakery, with the lights low, the stainless steel counters wiped down, and a spreadsheet open on her laptop showing projected launch day revenue, prepaid orders, sample trade costs, staffing hours, and marketing spend already committed. There is a moment, if you've ever had to stop loving someone in real time, when grief hardens into arithmetic. That was the moment for her. Naomi did not send one more angry text after that Friday night call. She did not post a public call-out. She did not ask friends to take sides or beg her mother to change her mind. She simply stopped talking and started working. The silence was not drama. It was strategy. The first thing she did was preserve everything. In her email to me, she said she felt nauseous the first time she opened her messages and reread them, but she forced herself to scroll anyway. Every text from Denise about the date change, every voice note, every image of the baby shower setup posted to the family group chat, complete with a caption that read, "Family comes first. So grateful for my girls." Every cancellation message from clients or guests who had RSVP'd to the opening. She screenshotted vendor confirmations, pre-orders with deposit dates, and her original grand opening flyer that had gone live 6 weeks earlier before Denise quietly rewrote the calendar. Then she did the hardest part, The numbers. Naomi sat at a small folding table in the back room of Juniper House Bakery and built 3 separate columns. The first column tracked lost revenue from customers who canceled or never showed up. The second captured sunk costs that could not be recovered, printed invitations, signage, paid social media ads, staff hours already scheduled, and perishable inventory prepared for the launch. The third column documented reputation damage, 2 catering leads that walked away, 1 social media collaboration that fell through, and a local food blogger who had confirmed attendance and would have been the first credible review the bakery received. It was not an emotional exercise anymore. That is important. Revenge Lily's stories sometimes paint the hero as emotionally unhinged. Naomi was the opposite. She was frighteningly composed. She color-coded her spreadsheet. She time-stamped every message. She noted which relative had been contacted by her mother and what reason Denise had given for their absence. When she was done, she made a folder on her desktop labeled simply Evidence. Inside were subfolders, cancellations, marketing waste, interference contacts, and revenue impact. That last one had a running total at the top. It was not sentimental, it was quantified. $8,400 in direct losses, and that was only the measurable part. The next step was legal, and I want to be careful here. Naomi did not immediately file a lawsuit. She consulted an attorney about her options. The lawyer she met with, a woman named Torres who ran a small civil practice in Columbus, explained that there was a specific cause of action in Ohio law called tortious interference with business relationships. Put simply, if someone intentionally and improperly interferes with your business, causes you economic harm, and you can prove intent and damages, you may be able to recover losses through civil court. It was not a slam dunk. Family cases are messy. A judge might see a mother and daughter fight and immediately look for ways to bury the case. But Torres told Naomi something that changed the trajectory of the entire situation. She said, "You do not need a jury to make your point. You need a demand letter that shows you are prepared to walk into one." Naomi left that meeting with a stack of documents and a new understanding of what boundaries could look like when they were backed by something heavier than hurt feelings. She went straight to a courier service and paid for overnight delivery. Inside a manila envelope went 3 things: a formal demand letter drafted by Torres's office, a summary of financial losses with supporting documentation, and a cover sheet with 1 sentence typed in 12-point font. "Since family was made a business issue, I am responding as a business owner." She sent it to her mother's home address, not her sister, not the family group chat. Just Denise Parker, delivered to her front door. The night the envelope arrived, Naomi blocked her mother's number. She updated the security code on the bakery's back door, returned the spare key her mother had been given for emergencies, and changed her voicemail greeting to a neutral recording that mentioned nothing personal. She told her attorney she wanted all future communication to go through the office. And then she did something I think a lot of people who grew up in these families would find nearly impossible. She went to work on Monday morning. She opened the bakery. She wiped down the display case. She turned on the ovens. She waited. The envelope took 2 days to be signed for. Naomi knew because her attorney forwarded her the delivery confirmation screenshot without saying a word. She stared at the image of her mother's signature on her phone for a long time before putting it away. Then she went back to pulling, though. The reaction was immediate and exactly what you would expect from someone who has spent a lifetime controlling a narrative and suddenly finds the microphone taken from her. Denise called Naomi's line 12 times on the first day alone. When the calls went straight to voicemail, she began leaving messages. The first one was soft. "Naomi, honey, call me. There's been a mistake." The second one was sharper. "This is not funny." By the 5th message, the tone had changed entirely. "You are embarrassing your own family. Do you understand what you have done?" Kelsey reached out separately through Instagram DM, which Naomi found almost funny. Her sister, who had never bothered to learn the bakery's phone number, now needed to communicate through a social media platform because the direct line was gone. Kelsey wrote that she and her mother were both shocked and heartbroken and asked Naomi to please just call Mom and fix this before it gets worse. Naomi did not reply. What happened next surprised everyone, including the lawyer. Denise did not accept the reality of the situation. Instead, she escalated publicly. She posted a long message in the same family group chat Naomi had quietly left the week before. The message framed Naomi as unstable, ungrateful, and unable to handle the pressures of new motherhood in the family. "My daughter Kelsey is going through a very sensitive time," Denise wrote. "Naomi has decided to make this about money instead of love. I hope she finds peace before it is too late." It was classic. Reframe the victim as the aggressor. Paint love and duty as the same thing. Imply, moral failure, where there is only boundary setting. The people who read that message and knew Naomi personally saw right through it. The people who didn't know her well enough began to quietly wonder. That too was damage. But Naomi was no longer in the business of managing other people's impressions of her choices. A neighbor who had canceled her RSVP to the grand opening lived 2 doors down from the bakery. She walked past Juniper House on a regular basis and noticed that the shop was open every day, well-staffed and surprisingly busy, given the circumstances. The neighbor started buying coffee there. Then she brought a friend. Then she told a third person about the cinnamon rolls. That is how word of mouth begins, in the smallest possible increments, not with a billboard, with one person who saw something real and could not stop talking about it. Around the same time, one of the cancellation emails came back with a follow-up. The client wrote, "I just found out from another vendor that your mother told everyone the launch was postponed. I wanted you to know that was not true on our end, and I would love to reschedule." Naomi forwarded that email to her attorney and stored it in the interference folder. But privately, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Vindication without having to ask for it. The bakery itself began to find its rhythm. Naomi had planned a conservative opening, 4 days a week, mornings only, with weekend brunch service added once staffing stabilized. She introduced a neighbor card that offered a free pastry after every 10 purchases. She started tagging local shops on Instagram when she posted daily specials. She adjusted her social media strategy to post behind-the-scenes clips of the baking process instead of seeking out influencers for paid promotion. People responded to the authenticity. The algorithm did too. A Columbus-based food blogger who had been on the original guest list finally reached out through the bakery's public email. She had heard about the launch day situation through a mutual contact and wanted to see if the bakery was worth featuring. Naomi did not tell her the story. She did not have to. The blogger came in, ordered 4 different items, and posted a story that afternoon that said, "Sometimes the best things come after the worst days. Meet Juniper House Bakery." Sales for that week increased by 39%, but it was not all upward momentum. There was a night, 3 weeks after the demand letter went out, when Naomi found herself in the walk-in cooler at 11:20 p.m. doing inventory. She was counting boxes of puff pastry dough when she noticed one of the sage green ribbons her mother had once complimented during the wall painting day. It had fallen behind a shelf weeks earlier and gotten dusted with flour. Naomi picked it up and stood there in the cold air, holding something so cheap and so loaded with meaning that it nearly brought her to her knees. She sat on the cooler floor, knees pulled to her chest, and let herself cry for the first time since the sabotage began. Not because she missed the money, because she realized fully and finally that she missed the idea of her mother. The mother she had always hoped would show up, not the one who had. That grief did not change her plan. It did not make her send a text. It did not make her call. It simply made her human enough to understand why this hurt so much and strong enough to keep going anyway. The quiet revenge was working, but the real reckoning had not happened yet. That would come in a different room with different people and under rules that had nothing to do with feelings. 6 weeks after the demand letter was delivered, Attorney Torres sent Naomi a single email with one sentence in the subject line. They want to talk. It was not a court date. It was not a lawsuit filing. It was a mediation session scheduled for 2 weeks out, voluntary but strongly recommended, held in a neutral conference room downtown with a retired family court mediator named Daniel Reeves. Denise had not chosen to fight this in court. She had chosen to try to manage it. That tells you everything about how she saw the situation. In her mind, Naomi was still a child who could be talked down from a ledge if the right person said the right things in the right room. Naomi walked into that mediation session alone. She wore the same navy blazer she had worn for her first vendor meeting years earlier. She carried a leather portfolio with printed copies of every document she had compiled. She did not look up when her mother entered the room. Denise looked exactly as Naomi expected, slightly smaller than she remembered, more made up. Nervous energy held together with a lot of practiced composure. Kelsey was not there, which surprised almost nobody. She had never been the type to face a conflict directly. Mediator Reeves opened by explaining the ground rules. Neutral space, no interruptions. Each party would speak. The goal was either settlement or a clear decision to proceed to litigation. He did not bring emotion into it. That was the point. Denise went first, and she did what she always did. She started with motherhood. I have raised 2 daughters alone since their father left. I have given everything to these girls. Naomi knows that. She talked about late-night hospital visits when Kelsey was born. She talked about Naomi's first day of high school. She talked, indirectly and with great precision, about how ungrateful it felt to receive a demand letter from her own child after years of sacrifice. Reeves listened without reacting. He took notes. He did not nod. That small silence was the most powerful thing Naomi had seen in a long time. When it was Naomi's turn, she did not speak about feelings. She opened her portfolio and laid out the first page. A timeline. Dates. Evidence. On June 3rd, I announced my grand opening date publicly. On June 10th, my mother moved my sister's baby shower to the same day without informing me. Between June 11th and June 12th, my mother contacted at least 7 people who had RSVP'd to my opening and told them I had rescheduled or scaled back. 3 of those people later confirmed this in writing. She paused. She let the room hold that. She continued. As a direct result of that interference, I lost $8,400 in confirmed and projected revenue. I also incurred $800 in wasted marketing spend, $600 in perishable inventory, and 2 lost catering leads that I expect to be worth a minimum of $4,000 over the next 12 months. That is $12,800 in direct, documented economic harm. Denise made a small sound, halfway between a scoff and a gasp. Reeves raised one hand gently, not to defend Naomi, but to remind Denise that this was a fact-finding session, not a debate. Now, Naomi said, turning to Reeves, you may look at this and think this is a family dispute that should stay between daughters and mothers, and I understand that instinct, but this was not a family dispute. This was an intentional disruption of a business event executed with knowledge of its timing, its audience, and its financial stakes. My mother did not accidentally block my opening. She replaced it, deliberately, with something she considered more important. She let that land too. Kelsey had never learned to sit with silence. Denise had mastered it because she used it as a weapon. But Naomi had learned something new in the weeks since that first demand letter. She had learned that silence could also be a shield, and it could be armor. When Denise finally spoke again, she tried the one move she had left. I did it because Kelsey needed me. She is having a difficult pregnancy. Naomi's response was short, clean, and final. Your daughter's pregnancy is not my liability. My livelihood is not your audience's apology. Reeves turned to Naomi and asked very carefully, what resolution are you seeking? Naomi did not hesitate. Full payment of documented losses, plus reasonable attorney fees, plus a written agreement that my mother will not contact me or interfere with my business without going through legal counsel. I am not here to punish her. I am here to protect myself. There is a difference, and I want to record it. Denise did not agree immediately, but she did not walk away. And when the session ended, Torres told Naomi that the other side had signaled openness to a structured settlement. The case would not go to trial. Not if the numbers closed in a way that made sense. The settlement did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived in an email from Torres's office on a Tuesday morning, 8 weeks after the mediation session, with a PDF attached and a subject line that read simply, executed, funds to be wired Friday. Denise Parker had agreed to pay $10,000 in total settlement, which covered the majority of Naomi's documented losses, plus a portion of attorney fees. It was not full compensation. It was, however, enough to close the case without going to trial, and enough to make the point that interference had a cost. More importantly, it came with a formal no-contact agreement. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits to the bakery, no messages through third parties. Any future communication would have to go through legal representation. It was not revenge in the dramatic sense. It was not a courtroom victory or a viral moment. It was something quieter and, I think, more durable, a boundary that had been written, signed, and filed. Naomi used part of the settlement money to upgrade the bakery's refrigeration system, which had been the one thing keeping her up at night since the opening. The rest went into a separate savings account she labeled Independence Fund. She told me in her email that she kept the documentation from the case in a locked cabinet, not because she wanted to keep the wound open, but because it reminded her that she had walked through something that would have broken a younger version of herself and come out the other side with her dignity intact. The bakery is thriving now. 6 months after the settlement, Naomi added a third staff member, started a weekly pre-order system for wedding cakes, and signed a small commercial account with a nearby co-working space that dates 2 desserts a week. The Instagram following grew past 3,000 without a single paid collaboration. The food blogger from the opening came back for a holiday feature and posted a reel that got 60,000 views in 48 hours. People who had skipped the grand opening started showing up. Some apologized, some did not. Naomi greeted them all the same way, politely, professionally, and without invitation into her personal life. As for Kelsey, the baby was born in early November. Naomi sent a small gift directly to the apartment, with no card and no personal note. It was the correct amount of distance, enough to acknowledge the existence of a child she may one day choose to know, not enough to pretend the relationship with the mothers involved had been repaired. Denise tried one more time to reach out about 3 months after the settlement. She sent a long handwritten letter through regular mail, which Naomi's attorney intercepted and opened before forwarding the contents in summary form. Denise wrote that she was heartbroken by how far Naomi had let this go, and that family is the only thing that does not leave. Naomi read the summary once, signed off on the attorney's recommendation to file no response, and placed the document in the locked cabinet. There is a specific kind of grief that comes when you realize that some doors do not reopen, no matter how much you once needed them to. Naomi has told me she still feels it, especially on Sunday mornings when she is mixing batter for the weekly apple loaf, the smell of cinnamon and brown butter filling the kitchen, and her phone stays quiet. Her father used to love apple loaf. She bakes it every Sunday now. It is the one recipe she never puts on the menu. But here's what I told Naomi when we finished our last email exchange. Forgiveness is not a transaction you owe anyone. Closure is not something other people give you. And the most powerful thing you can do when someone treats your dreams as disposable is to build something so solid that their opinion of it no longer has a place to land. If you are sitting here tonight thinking about a mother who chose someone else over you, a sister who benefited from being the favorite and knew it, or a family that thinks love should cost you your boundaries, I am not going to tell you to call them back. I am going to ask you something harder and more honest. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming and started building something that no one could take away from you? Naomi Parker's kitchen is still running. Her oven is still warm. Her door still opens. And her phone number? Still blocked. If this story hit something real in you tonight, I do not need your opinion on whether Naomi did the right thing. I need your story. Because the truth is, most of us have a Naomi Parker in our life, or we are one. The only question is whether we let them keep writing the ending. Tell me in the comments, how did you finally stop orbiting someone who never chose you back? I am reading. I always read.